At last I have it, the egg of the lesser Samoan nut-scratching pewee, the only one of its kind. The bird is extinct. I alone among the members of the secret evil millionaires' egg-collecting society possess this one remaining egg. I think I will open the refrigerator and gloat on my precious one more time. Where is it? It's not where I left it. Greg?
Sup, roomie?
Where is my egg?
Dude, I offered you some. Remember when I knocked on your highly fortified secret door?
I was in the middle of something. I pulled the heart out of an ostrich and showed it to him as he fell over dead.
Dude, I was trying to tell you I was making my famous cream cheese and chive egg scramble, and did you want some? That egg was awesome, by the way.
Greg, I told you not to touch my stuff. Like, in the refrigerator, if I write Cayenne in big letters on something, doesn't that tell you that it's mine, so don't eat it?
Dude, it was just an egg.
No, it totally wasn't. It was extremely rare, and 2 of my assistants died scaling a craggy cliff face to reach the isolated nest of the lesser Samoan nut-scratching pewee.
I also used up your hot sauce.
That was golden eagle blood. I am so bummed right now. You'll have to listen to this show to understand the plight of a wealthy, diabolical, obsessive egg collector like me. And now he's mad because they stopped making emu Eggos. Colin McEnroe.
Yeah, remember those the Eggo waffles? And they came in an emu flavor. That's actually not true. But most of what we're going to tell you today, I would say 99% of what we're going to tell you today about eggs is true. And I do want to say, first of all, that we're live here in the afternoon, and we have 3 different segments. So if we're talking about something in one segment that interests you, and you want to say something about it, you should call immediately at 860-275-7266. And here's how the segments are going to go. We're going to begin with a conversation about eggs that you can eat that are not chicken eggs, which has always kind of fascinated me. And we'll get into that. And then in the second segment, we're going to talk about this obsessive, eccentric underworld of egg collectors who collect eggs that they're not supposed to collect. Eggs from birds living in the wild who are, in some cases, perched on the brink of extinction. In some cases, may have been driven to extinction by these egg collectors. This especially seems to be a mania in Great Britain, so we'll tell you all about that. And it really is both hilarious and disturbing. And I mean, these people, and actually, I mean, they do risk, as the intro suggested, their physical safety and prison time in order to collect eggs that they have no business owning. And then lastly, you may have been aware of this over the last week or so. It's a piece of scientific research that kind of went viral, the story of a scientist who figured out how to unboil a boiled egg. That is, how to take a boiled egg whose proteins have become essentially solid, stuck together, and unstick them, reliquefy them, which is more than just a parlor trick. It may have pretty significant implications for cancer research. But as I said, we're going to begin talking about eggs that you can eat that do not come from chickens. To help us do that is Woozy Wickfors, who's the owner of The Walking Wood and the mother of many barnyard pets. We'll tell you, by the way, if you go to WNPR.org and check out the Colin McEnroe Show website, we will tell you how to even pre-order some eggs, some of the eggs that we'll be talking about here. And assuming he picks up his phone and or we find him, adding to the conversation as we go will be Tyler Anderson, chef, owner of Millwright's restaurant in Simsbury. So, but Woozy Wickfors, we're going to begin with you, and we're going to talk about how your story begins. So it began, I believe, with the acquisition of a rooster. So not an egg problem right there.
No.
But then came the emu. So tell us how it is that you came to own an emu.
It was a gift for my 50th birthday. 2 emus.
And that's not a gift that most people would be given. How did the givers know that you would be a happy recipient of such a thing?
Well, I'm not sure I was a happy recipient at that point. I worked at DEP, what was then DEP, now it's DEEP, and some conservationists were aware of some emus that were looking for a home. And they thought, this is something she's never been given before.
Now, I'm afraid of emus. I mean, when I look at them, I'm not afraid of very many animals, but they seem to be full of malevolence. Like they hate me and they want to kill me. But apparently that's not the case.
Well, they do. They're tall enough that they can look you right directly in the face, and they will look right inside you. Their eyes are Yeah, they could give you the willies, I guess.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's cause to be afraid of them.
I mean, you've achieved a loving relationship with them?
Yes.
Well, then I'll take your word for it. But let's talk about the eggs. Now, the eggs are huge, right? They're about 10 times the size of a chicken egg?
Yep.
And
Yes,
so
they are.
under
They
what
look like an oversized avocado or a Nerf ball.
So under what circumstances do you eat them? I mean, you'd have to be making breakfast for a lot of people or something.
Well, since it's just my husband and I got pretty tricky, and I made crustless quiche or frittatas, I guess, and I made them in muffin tins. And that way I could stick them in the freezer and just pop them out for lunch when we wanted them.
What does an emu egg taste like?
Nothing.
Nothing? It tastes like nothing?
Bland. Very, very bland.
Huh.
But it's viscous, and it souffles up when you cook it. So it's a wonderful carrier for whatever flavor you want to add to it.
And are there restaurateurs who are interested in getting your emu eggs to serve to
I've
them?
had some ask, but nobody's ever followed through. And I'm sure that's in part because it's expensive.
Right. Now, how much is it? How expensive is it?
Generally speaking, this is retail. I ask for $40 for the entire egg, fresh eating egg.
Yeah, for one egg. So, although if you think about it, as being 10 times the size of a chicken egg, it's a little bit better deal than it sounds like.
If you're going to go out to brunch
Yeah.
or stay home and have something special.
Right. In other words, if you had a bunch of people over and made them an emu omelet or frittata or something like that, which based on what you're saying, Woozy, you would have to flavor that up a little bit to have it be exciting for people. But it would be implicitly exciting for a certain kind of company, right?
I can easily get 2 good-sized quiche out of 1 emu egg.
Yeah. So on that basis, it's a deal, right? You don't spend a lot of money on brunch. You stay home and eat an emu egg. So now there are other eggs that you now cultivate or ranch or whatever one does with eggs.
That my girls give me.
Yeah, all right. So tell us about these other birds and their eggs. What else have you got there?
Well, the other end of the spectrum would be the quail.
Mm-hmm.
There it would take about 10 quail eggs to make 1 egg,
Yeah.
1 chicken egg. I have several kinds of quail, and I'm going back to the basic brown quail, the Japanese coturnix. Good hardy bird. They're friendly. They're not flighty, and good layers. And, popular with the restaurants.
No, quail eggs. We do see quail eggs in a whole bunch of different cuisines. Before we get to the other birds, let me ask you this before I forget: Are all the birds reasonably cooperative about parting with their eggs? I mean, I once again, not to emphasize the emu as in any way malevolent, but I just would be hesitant about taking an emu egg without its
heard
permission.
that emus are horribly protective.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the case with mine. Maybe I got lucky, or it's just how they are with me. In fact, he'll show me where they've buried the egg, where they've hid it.
That's an interesting thing. You say he, and that's an important thing about emus, too, that the male does more of the egg sitting. Do I have that right?
The male does all of the egg sitting. Unlike some of the other rat types, ostriches and rheas, emus pair off.
Yeah.
And she's the one that selects the mate, and he's the one that rears the eggs.
So it's like stay-at-home dad, basically.
Yeah. He sits there for 56 days until the eggs hatch, and hopefully she'll bring him dinner now and again.
So we've got the quail, we've got the emu. Now you've also done duck and pheasant, and I know duck eggs I actually cook with some regularity, and I'm familiar with those. I'm surprised that more people don't use them. I mean, they're kind of a little bit richer tasting, and I think they probably have more cholesterol.
Too. And so many people think they're only for baking, that you don't eat them, and we disagree.
Yeah, no, I use them in dishes other than baked dishes. Tell me about pheasant eggs. That's a relatively new thing for you?
Brand new for me,
yeah.
Yes. This will be the first year that my pheasants are old enough to give me eggs. The only pheasant eggs I've had have gone into the incubator, so I can't tell you how they taste.
All right, so we're going to add to the conversation Tyler Anderson, the chef and owner of Millwright's Restaurant in Simsbury. He does cook with these eggs. He may be interested in buying one of Woozy's emu eggs. We'll see about that.
He might know how pheasant eggs taste.
Yeah, and he may know how pheasant eggs taste. So, Tyler Anderson, give us a sense of the range of eggs that you cook with.
Hi, how are you today?
Just fine.
Good. Well, we sort of the eggs are like everything else that we cook with. It's sort of like whatever comes to our back door, to say, is what we use on our menu. So we use tons of duck eggs. Actually, there's a hairdresser in Simsbury who raises ducks, and we buy our duck eggs from him. And we use quail eggs quite a bit. What I like to really use is I like to use different size chicken eggs. So there's a chicken egg. When a chicken is a certain age, it's called a bantam egg, and the yolk actually weighs more than the white in the chicken egg. So we like to use chicken eggs at that time in their life. So we're willing to use any egg pretty much.
Are there? I mean, Woozy's been talking about quail and emu and their various properties. As a chef, are there various properties in these eggs that you're interested in?
Yeah, we're looking for yolk. I mean, we want the richness, we want the fat, we want the flavor. So we love a bright yellow large yolk. So that's where baking with duck eggs is great, because it allows you to get such a great richness into whatever you're using it in, because the egg is so fatty and the yolk is so bright and large.
So Woozy's pretty much ready to harvest some pheasant eggs, but she doesn't have a sense yet of how they taste. Do you have any information on that? Have you done the pheasant thing yet?
No, I don't. But you can sort of tell. You can sort of tell what kind of egg you can expect by the type of bird it is. Yeah. So, a duck is going to have a fattier egg than, say, a chicken or a quail. So pheasant being maybe a bird that's a little leaner, I would assume that maybe the egg is a little leaner as well, but I've never used them before. I'd love to.
Yeah. And, I just want to go back to Woozy for a second here. Woozy, so who are your customers? Are they people who are just, how do people become curious enough about a different kind of egg to maybe want to buy an emu egg or a duck egg or a quail or pheasant? Who gets interested in this stuff?
Well, for years and years I did farmers markets. In fact, last summer was the first time I didn't. I may go back to it this year. And that's where you get to talk to the people directly, and you can drive up the curiosity factor quite a bit. We've got a big basket of emu egg shells, and they go, "Huh? What's that?" Dinosaur eggs.
And Tyler Anderson, one of the changes that farmers markets have wrought, I think, for you talked at the beginning about just different kinds of chicken eggs and different kinds of sizes too. Mm-hmm. And so most of us grew up with either the white egg or the brown egg. You go to farmers markets and there are these Araucuna eggs, which are this beautiful blue, and there's this huge range of colors. And people who do a lot of backyard chicken stuff have just shown me or given me eggs. It looks like a Sherwin-Williams paint palette or something. It's amazing how many different colors that they turn into. Is that interesting to the chef? What do you care what the shell of the egg looks like?
No, we don't care. It's cute, and it looks nice, and for the most part, like, if those colored eggs really do mean that you're going to get a very well raised chicken. So it's not a chicken that's been forced to lay. It's a chicken that has taken its time and built up the minerals in its egg laying process. And so you're going to get a good egg, but at the end of the day, our guests don't see that shell, so they're tasting the egg. So, it does matter because, like I said, 90% of the time it does mean that it's a really good egg and that it's been an animal that's been cared for, but the color of the egg doesn't really matter per se.
Although
I think Tyler's exactly right that the egg flavor comes from what the chicken has been eating.
Yeah.
I have several chefs that at brunch put out a big bowl of the blown eggshells to show the different colors. And again, it's just a way to get the conversation started.
And Woozy, you actually have found other uses for eggshells. Don't you make earrings out of the...
Oh, I do, yes. Quite in my spare time. Quite a bit of crafty stuff. The quail eggs, I have made a number of different styles of earrings. The all-white quail eggs I'll decorate like miniature Easter eggs. I do the Ukrainian psanki. Mm-hmm. The emu eggs are interesting because it's such a thick shell. It's very, very dark green on the outside, pure white on the inside, and it goes through a teal color. So it can be carved like a cameo.
Wow. And Tyler Anderson, I assume that you have at least sometimes cooked with some of these larger bird eggs, like ostrich and emu.
Oh, yeah.
You've got emus right down the road from you at Flamig Farm. I don't know how many eggs they actually produce, but so tell us about, as a chef, what those eggs are like.
Well, again, those eggs are nice because there's a certain richness to them. But to us, they're sort of a novelty. Mm-hmm. I mean, the flavor, the nuances of the flavor between, say, a duck egg, an emu egg, and an ostrich egg, you're never really going to realize. It's just a fatty yolk to a fatty yolk to a fatty yolk. But, it's fun. Like, I've made hollandaise from ostrich eggs and emu eggs and stuff like that. And it's really fun, and it does turn out a great product. But, to me, when it comes down to the intricacies of flavor, it's a little bit more about maybe being a novelty than it is actually, being able to nail like a duck to emu to an ostrich egg.
So,
and Tyler mentioned before about the richness of the yolk
mm-hmm.
and how it can develop that almost orange color depending on what the bird is feeding. This is where emus, and I don't know that much about ostriches, but this is where emus are dinosaurs. It doesn't matter what they eat. That yolk is going to stay a pale buff color. It's not going to change color. And I think that's part of why it doesn't have the robust flavor that you might expect from a great big green egg.
I am now, you've got me dying to try an emu egg, particularly the idea of eating something.
I don't want you to die.
Well, dying was the wrong word, but longing, yes, pining. I mean, first of all, the idea of eating something that's that close to being a dinosaur egg is kind of exciting. Tyler Anderson, you when we first started talking, you used the phrase kind of whatever walks up to the door, and I assume that doesn't mean ostriches and emus are walking up to your door and volunteering their offspring to you. But do people kind of do they come forward? Are they contacting you and saying, I've got quail, I've got this, I've got that?
Yeah, I mean the longer you're in one space and you have your restaurant in one location and you kind of put it out there that you're a cook who's willing to work with unique products, it seems like the more unique products come to your back door. And I say come to your back door, and I don't want anybody to be lining up at our back door, please.
Right.
But people call us and say, hey, I have 30 ducks and I have all these eggs and I don't know what to do with them. Would you be interested in taking them? And many times we're like, absolutely. But it's not just for eggs; it's for many other things. But eggs are one of those things that we do have the luxury of working with a wide variety of at some points in the year.
And of course, a lot of it has to do with having a reliable supply and enough of them. And so, Woozy, give us a sense. You have one laying emu, and my understanding is I think it's winter and spring is the sort of the egg producing time. How many eggs do you get out of your emu, whatever her name may be?
Well, when Stella and Monk were a little bit younger, they would start laying in October, and they would lay about one egg every 3 days, all through the winter and into the spring, even into June. So I might, on a really good year, get 30 eggs. I have more than just the two now, and I'm not sure whether jostling for space or what, but I did change feed, and that might be it. I'm not getting eggs yet, and I'm a little bit panicked because, Stella and Monk are 19 years old. They should be at the prime of their life.
Well, we share your concern. Thank you. Thank both of you so much for spending some time talking to us about eggs. We have to stop now, or we will be arrested by agents of the food schmooze who are circling around outside saying, this sounds very much like a conversation we might be having. We're going to come back and talk about the darkish netherworld of exotic and illegal egg collectors.
Scrambled in the morning, you like your sunny side up. I like mine. Scrambled in the morning, you like your sunny side up. I like mine. Scrambled in the morning, you like your sunny side up. I like mine. Scrambled in the morning, you like your sunny side.
First of all, I should say that the idea to do a show about eggs came from Betsy Kaplan, and the minute she said it, I said, yes, we want to do a show about eggs. We didn't really know what we meant by that. And then she found this article. It really is sort of the perfect New Yorker article. I mean, it has everything. It is, as I said before, both funny and very disturbing. It has just amazing details, and it's about a subculture that's a very strong subculture that you've just never heard of. You were unaware that it existed. At least I was. So joining us now is the author of that article, Julian Rubenstein. Is it Rubenstein or Steen?
Or Rubenstein, yeah.
Rubenstein, all right. Julian Rubenstein, an award-winning journalist whose work has appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, Rolling Stone. He's also the author of The Ballad of the Whiskey Robber and is currently working on a documentary called The Holly. So this world that you uncovered it almost exclusively in England, this world of, in some cases, very wealthy and in a few other cases, people who are just scraping by, but obsessively collecting wild bird eggs by the thousands and risking their safety and risking prison time in the process. First of all, is it a uniquely English or British phenomenon? Is there a parallel anywhere else?
Well, surprisingly, or perhaps not for some who are more familiar with some of the oddities of the Brits, it is a relatively oriented toward British men, yeah. English men, even more specifically. And there are reports on much smaller levels around the world of some stealing of eggs and, in fact, selling them on a black market, which is, by the way, not what I was encountering there. There's not a lot of that, though, because it is very difficult to do so without getting caught, and so there's not a lot of it going on. But so, yes, on the whole, it's primarily located there in the UK, what I discovered.
Now, most of what we're going to talk about involves the activities of these men who are out there in the wild, essentially raiding nests, stealing these eggs. How you were able to write this entire article and not use the word poach is beyond me. But I was impressed by it. So that's the main means of this. But you do allude early in the article to another kind of egg thief when you visit this museum. I think it's called the Tring, where in fact you yourself were subjected to intense scrutiny. Your passport is photographed and kept on file for 5 years, and you're patted down like you're going into some maximum security facility. And a lot of this is because a man named Mervyn Shorthouse. Well, you tell them what Mervyn Shorthouse did. Yeah.
Well, so I mean, like you said, sort of at the beginning. I mean, all of it is. It is such a sort of, it was an invisible world to me. And I found out a lot of Brits were aware of it, not necessarily that it's going on this level. And certainly I came to it from more of a perspective of first discovering that there was this level of crime going on and then encountering this whole sort of invisible world. And the other invisible worlds I've been used to delving into were wholly unlike this. So I didn't really have a lot of sort of, environmental or ornithological background coming into this, but I discovered that, for example, at Tring, which is this museum about an hour north of London, which does have the largest egg collection in the world, and it started getting its eggs, in fact, primarily from people such as Walter Rothschild, who back in their sort of early to mid-1900s had the largest one of the largest collection of all animal species, and after his death had, in fact, some 200 species named after him, including a worm. But he was obsessed with eggs, as was a man named Mervyn Shorthouse, who actually would visit the Tring so often that he was on very friendly terms with the people there and had invented an injury that put him in a wheelchair and enabled him over the course of 3 years to steal 10,000 eggs out of this facility, which was, I think, the primary reason that they afterward instituted a huge number of security precautions. And interestingly, here you have a museum famous worldwide for its collection of eggs, yet you can visit any part of the museum except the egg collection unless you have special permission, which I was able to get, and then still went through this whole rigmarole to get in.
Yeah, it also seems like having lost 10,000 eggs in a 3-year period to a fake wheelchair-bound invalid, it's okay. So they won't get fooled again, as the WHO said, but it's a little bit like locking the chicken coop after the chickens have escaped. But this that's the aberration. The norm, if this could be called a norm, involves men who go out in the wild and they steal eggs right out of nests, and a lot of them belong to something called the Jourdain Society, which really does seem to fit almost our sort of movie-generated motif of this society of hooded figures, these wealthy men who have this bizarre obsession, right? Many of these are men of great means who have just been gripped by this need to get as many different eggs as they can. Tell us about the Jourdain Society.
Yeah, so the Jourdain Society is really a way to start to see the roots of what is an obsession for a lot of Englishmen, or rather some, but some few that we're speaking of here who've made a name for themselves. The Jourdain Society started out in the earlier 1900s when as it was either the Ornithological Union or the Oological Society. These two little groups had basically a standoff, in fact, over whether or not they felt it was okay to take bird eggs. And this was also at a time when the Audubon Society was first coming into its own, and Teddy Roosevelt was working with them, and these environmental groups were gaining a lot of power at the time in terms of their understanding of how things were working and what dangers there were to species. But there was a guy, Charles Francis Robert Jourdain, a very esteemed Oxford-educated ornithologist who, after his death, the union that he was heading up took on his name, and it was, in fact, stocked primarily with similarly educated white Englishmen who were naturalists, basically, and also egg collecting really is sort of a cousin, I would say, of bird watching, in that, unlike Mervyn Shorthouse, what these guys really are excited by is not only collecting these things, but also the sort of the thrill of the chase and of finding these eggs. And so they're kind of like, they actually kind of feel they're even better than bird watchers, because they actually have to go so far as get to the nest and get the eggs, which requires all kinds of understanding of course, where they are, but also the breeding habits and even when they can approach these nests, because the females, if they're guarding the nest, are very aggressive. So they basically made this into, as the laws were changing, and they started changing in about 1954, and there was another big change in 81, but it basically, the laws in the UK, and this was similar around the world, there were laws starting to be implemented that you couldn't take wild bird eggs. So these guys were sort of forced to become more and more clandestine in their meetings and their gatherings, and they actually literally were resorting at one point to communicating by coded letter. There was a fantastic incident in 1994 where their real rival on the law enforcement side, an organization called the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, which is one of the most powerful and biggest protectionist groups in the world, with over 1 million members. They actually were usually tapping these meetings and following them, and they did a whole sting in 1994 where they had planted some actual employees posing as just women at a bar who were chatting these guys up before the meeting in this hotel, and were able to go in and actually raid the meeting and arrested the whole place. And then in the following week, there was this countrywide bust resulting in tens of thousands of eggs and all these arrests. And from that point on, the Jourdain Society really has taken a huge fall from kind of being, what they felt the cream of the crop of, naturalists, to on the run from the law, communicating by code numbers in their letters. And I mean, one would only go recently. There was one who only did an interview if his voice was disguised. they were really, so they were not easy to convince to speak to me, and it took a while to find some of them, but I did end up getting to a number of them.
Yeah, there are these hilarious letters that seem like either something out of James Bond or Get Smart. I'm not sure which. In which 15 writes a letter to 83. They have only numbers. And so I mean, just to sort of backtrack to something that you said earlier on. I mean, there is something intrepid. I mean, it might be disgusting, alarming, and in some cases may have driven entire species to extinction. This weird hobby, but there is something intrepid about these people. I mean, Jourdain himself, I think, slid down a cliff trying to get to a nest and was badly scarred by it or something. And another one, Colin Watson, I think his name was, died falling out of a tree where he was trying to reach down and get into a nest. I mean, you can get hurt doing this.
Oh my God, absolutely. I mean, these guys are actually pretty tough, and that is, and it's just like in like rock climbing or ice climbing. These things where guys have different reputations. I was finding out, like, this guy, he's a famously great nest finder, or like, so he was great at orienteering, and they would think very extraordinarily kind of detail oriented with their notebooks about tracking things. And other guys who were actually great climbers. I mean, you have a real variety of skills that are needed here. And the guy you mentioned, Colin Watson, one of the most infamous and reviled egg collectors in England, ultimately died climbing a tree to reach an eagle's nest. And a great headline, I thought, after his death in the Daily Mail was "Nest in Peace." So these guys have also, engendered quite a real hatred. Some of the authorities there, one of them who I was interviewed extensively for this story, one of the senior investigators for the RSPP, who'd been formerly a police officer, said he'd never encountered any other crime for which people were more adamant about punishment. That people in England absolutely hate egg collectors and what they do, and it bears talking about. I imagine about the question of, well, so is it dangerous and how dangerous? If you want, I could sort of talk a bit about that and what it's doing. Just because in that summer I followed a redback shrike, a pair who had appeared for the first time in about 20 years in England, and it had created hundreds of people had written in volunteering to guard these nests, and sure enough, they had a 24-hour-a-day guard on this single redback shrike nest in the south of England in Devon. And it was nonetheless, as one of the RSPB investigators I was there with said, well, of course the collectors are still going to come, and sure enough they did. They were marked down and followed, and they got a visit at their house. And they're just addicted to going, despite the fact that this would be a prized catch. Obviously, this redback shrike, a very rare bird that had not been seen in 20 years in England, and their disappearance was blamed on egg collectors, which is debated whether or not it was the truth. But collectors will say, inevitably and across the board, they are, first of all, they consider themselves total environmentalists. They feel a famous sort of quote from collectors that they will say is that they're only stealing a bird's time, because most birds will actually relay their eggs. But that is also disputed, as you might imagine, which apparently for a lot of the more rare birds, which are more prized, they don't always relay their eggs, and in that case, you might have a species go for a year without laying, and you also have environmental factors that are contributing. So in the eyes of law enforcement and environmentalists, they believe that it's just wrong and illegal to steal eggs, and that it can damage the survival of species, and that they believe, and I think it's true, that there are cases where that really has been a concern. On the other side, what I found is that there's sort of you have these real extremists on both ends. There's now prison time available for egg collectors, and some of these guys are actually doing time, and one of them, even for the first time ever, has been banned for life from going to Scotland, where he was going to collect a lot of his eggs. It's a bit of a standoff between two different sides of extremists, but one of them at least has the side of the law on them, and that's the authorities and the environmentalists.
I think Samuel Johnson attempted to be banned for life from going to Scotland, but was unsuccessful. We're talking to Julian Rubenstein. So I fell in love with this article in particular when, first of all, we should say that the article describes this thing called Operation Easter. One of the points that you make is that the Great Britain doesn't really have, or England doesn't have, the equivalent really of the U.S. Fish and Game, or some kind of central agency that does all the policing of this. Instead, what you have is this fusion of law enforcement and then especially this chartered private society, this Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, which you've referenced before, which has its own investigators, these two especially intrepid investigators and enforcers who, I don't know why this isn't a major motion picture already, I don't know, but maybe it will be eventually. But anyway, I fell in love with the article when you described one of these two investigators, Mark Thomas, breaks into this guy's house with the police. This Operation Easter is this fusion, again, of traditional law enforcement and these environmentalist, protectionist, private society people. And it's the house of a guy named David Lingham, whose home contained 3,600 eggs. He broke into tears when Thomas and the police arrived in 2004. "Thank God you've come," he said. "I can't stop." So this is like, one of those murderers who writes something in lipstick, on a bathroom mirror or something, "Stop me before I kill again." I mean, these guys are they have a fever. They can't stop doing this, even though they know it's not in their best interests.
Yeah. And I think it's true. These are really actually addicts, especially the ones who are left doing it now. And this is actually fascinating, is that because of the changes in the law, this has actually gone from being a very upper class activity to a very working class group of people who are doing it, who are frankly the probably only ones who are willing to risk the penalties that they are going to face if they're caught. And the guy you mentioned there, Lingham, he was actually arrested in a trailer park. He was a boxer living in a trailer park who was also addicted and had these things hidden in compartments all over his home, all over his trailer home. And similarly, the guy who I had followed, who ultimately is now banned from Scotland, didn't fit the original profile and was a real loner and unemployed and living off of on the dole. It seemed potentially for maybe even for some emotional disorder, or it was I was unable to confirm it, although I did ultimately speak to him. But yes, I mean, these are people who are often, their lives when these investigators encounter them are clearly completely absorbed and consumed by their pursuit of bird eggs.
This is an amazing story, and it will be a major motion picture someday. It's got everything. Julian Rubenstein, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks for having me.
All right. When we come back, we're going to talk about a scientific breakthrough that went viral because, you can unring a bell. You can't unring a bell, but you can unboil an egg.
Stay up, watch the eggs of your chickens roll away, roll away. Watch the eggs of your chickens roll away.
Betsy Kaplan sat on today's show until it hatched. Our interns are Kelsey Bissell and Julia Pistel. Greg Hill appeared in the intro and tweets for us at WNPR Colin. The part of Bill Curry was played by Big Bird. For show pages, articles, and videos of the Faith Middleton Show staff eating unboiled, refried, twice-baked, repoached ostrich omelets, visit our website, WNPR.org. On tomorrow's show, The Nose looks at the war stories told by Clint Eastwood and Brian Williams. And now, back to Colin.
Before I introduce Gregory Weiss, let me just say that during the reading of Julian Rubenstein's article and then that whole interview, I was hounded by guilt from my childhood because, although this really was no threat to the species, but my grandmother lived over it was a little market in Plainville, Connecticut, and the market had a sign announcing its existence, which ran right under my grandmother's windows that looked out onto the street. And pigeons nested behind the signs. And my grandmother, for whatever reason, just didn't want them there. And so she and I, it was often my job, would open the windows and take the eggs out of their nest. My grandmother was sort of a birth control pioneer for pigeons. Her whole idea was pretty soon pigeons would have this sense of futility creeping into their lives because their eggs were never there and that they would leave. And it didn't work. I mean, it went on for years. But now I feel like maybe I'm part of that, that whole world of brigands and thieves that Julian Rubinstein's talking about. Well, on a much more hopeful level, we're talking to Gregory Weiss, a professor of chemistry at the University of California at Irvine, whose work, as I said, did go viral because maybe it has far-reaching significance, but it starts with something that people can kind of wrap their minds around, which is once an egg has been boiled and its proteins start to stick together, can you effectively unboil an egg? And Gregory Weiss, the answer, according to you, is, in a sense, yes, right? You were able to take a boil. Explain what it is that you did.
Sure. Thanks, Colin, for your interest in our research.
Sure.
So we started with really hard-boiled eggs. We boiled them for a good 20 minutes or so, just to ensure that they were completely hard, and then dissolve. Oh, and I should say at this point the proteins are all tangled up, which is what hard-boiled eggs are. And then we added this chemical that untangles the proteins, allows them to drift apart. The problem there, so that's been done previously. And the problem is, once the proteins have been untangled, they're still in the wrong shape, so you haven't actually done any unboiling yet. And the next step is the sort of trick to the whole process. We used a new device that was just invented a couple of years ago by a collaborator in Australia, really a creative and clever guy named Colin Raston. And his laboratory invented something called a vortex fluid device. This vortex fluid device puts the solution with these egg proteins under high shear forces. So the proteins are like these rubber bands that are getting stretched and then snapped back and stretched and snapped and stretched and snapped until, bam, at one point they suddenly go back to their original shape. And the key is that in this machine, they're being held away from each other so they don't get a chance to retangle and reform boiled eggs.
So let's backtrack just a second here because this was a thing that was very difficult for me with my limited apprehension of science to understand. But I can't remember who was helpful to me in this. It was either Betsy Kaplan, my producer, or an article, one of the many articles I read about this. But somebody described the proteins in the original unboiled egg as being folded up, kind of like origami. In other words, they had a shape which made them not stick to one another. So if you imagine an origami, if you unfolded it and it were kind of damp, the flatter, less shaped pieces of paper would stick together. Is that kind of what's happening when we boil an egg?
That is, yes, indeed. So when the proteins are beautifully folded up into little tiny globs that are like a origami sculpture, they're held apart from each other, and they're completely soluble in water. So they're kind of nice and cozy in their liquid confines. But then when you boil them, you're starting to tug up on the edges of the origami sculpture, and it falls apart and straightens out. And the inside that used to be hidden away is now exposed, and that inside is sticky. That's one of the reasons why the proteins form their shapes in the first place. And now the proteins start running into each other, and so that stickiness starts to stick to itself. And it ends up giving you this cross-linked, messy aggregate that looks opaque and solid to us when we look at boiled eggs.
Now, obviously this did attract a lot of excitement. It did kind of go viral on the internet, but I mean, I don't think people necessarily understood the implications of this, other than that it might be very interesting to go to brunch at Greg Weiss's house. But the reality is that this process may have all kinds of other applications, including, as I understand it, the detection and treatment of cancer. So help me understand that one a little bit. Sure.
So, Colin, when I'm in my laboratory and I'm making proteins for my cancer diagnostics work, my lab and many others do experiments like this where we're trying to make these proteins, and oftentimes they come out like boiled eggs. The proteins are jammed onto each other in the cells that we're using to mass produce them. And rather than coming out beautifully folded like individual origamis, instead they come out as a sort of mass that it looks just like egg white. And so we need ways that allow us to tease apart this type of material and restore it back to its beautiful shapes that it originally started with. And then that gives us a way of using those shapes to then develop diagnostics for cancer or study those proteins and understand better how they contribute to cancer.
Now, one of the other possible applications here, as I understand it, has to do with I don't know, food storage is the wrong way to put it, but so a lot of food processes are doing the kind of thing we're talking about, right? When you turn milk into cheese, when you turn flour and yeast into bread, when you turn grape juice into wine, I assume basically, once again, you're kind of refolding or changing the shape of these proteins.
Well, a little, Colin. What's happening with many of those processes, like when you're browning meat or cooking bread or something like that, the chemicals are undergoing a chemical transformation, and bonding is changing. Boiling an egg, it turns out, is kind of a special case. What's happened there is the proteins have just unfolded, but chemically they haven't changed their bonding patterns. So the connectivity of the molecules is still the same. And so that was relatively easy for us to reverse. But it's going to be really hard to do something like, I don't know, unburn your scones or something like that. That's much, much harder. But in terms of food storage and food applications, I'm really excited about this. Not necessarily because we'd be able to ship boiled eggs to wherever you want and then just, zap them with an unboiler or something like that. That's not at all what we can do. I want to just emphasize that. The stuff that comes out unboiled at the end of our experiments is like this very dilute egg white in like a saline solution and a little bit of salt water. But what I'm excited about, though, is that this gives us a new way to put mechanical energy in and then affect change at a molecular level. And if you think about it, cooks have been doing this for years. Cooks have been, whipping up egg whites and introducing air into the egg whites, and the air has interesting consequences for things. But to actually reach in and do it at a molecular scale is, I think, going to open up potentially a new frontier for us to explore. And if there's one thing I get excited about, Colin, it's new ways to cook food. It's new flavors to taste and things like that. So that's what I'm thrilled about.
It seems as though this all has to start as pure research, that you actually have to be in an environment where you can ask a much more fundamental question, one whose future applications may be there, maybe not there, may be obvious, maybe less obvious. But it sounds like you started with a much more general, pure science question.
Oh, yes. No, you're absolutely right, Colin. I couldn't agree more. It is, this started as sort of a blue sky thing that I thought would be just neat to try. I was visiting Australia, sitting in the office of Colin Raston, and we looked at each other. We realized, wow, we have almost nothing to talk about. We're from two totally opposite fields. We don't really collaborate with each other all that often, or I don't collaborate in those fields very often. The fields don't usually mix. But then we started talking about what we do in our own fields, and I realized that this new device that he had invented for a totally different purpose might solve this problem that I have in my own laboratory. So we just thought it'd be a fun thing to try.
Well, Greg Weiss, this has been fascinating to talk to you about, and we will stay in touch, and we will watch, and we will see the future applications. I can virtually guarantee you that there's a bar in Brooklyn that wants to serve, your reconstituted egg whites in saline solution in a test tube with vodka. So it's just a matter of finding the right place. Thank you so much for joining us today.
That would be really cool. I'll meet you in that bar in Brooklyn.
All right. Sounds like a date. All right. So I want to thank especially Betsy Kaplan for thinking up this whole thing and finding all these amazing guests and asking all these terrific questions. Because when we started this thing out, believe me, I didn't know about the secret underworld of egg collectors. I didn't know about Greg Weiss and his science. I didn't know about any of this. All I knew was that I liked to cook duck eggs. We will be back tomorrow with the nose. We have James Hanley. We have Rand Cooper. We have Tracy Wu Fastenberg. And we all went to see American Sniper this week, but that's kind of turned into a conversation also about memory and history. Brian Williams has kind of had a little bit of a bad week telling a war story of being a war correspondent that turned out to be kind of not true. But that's got us all talking among ourselves about how history gets reshaped. Maybe especially the history of war. Things come out a lot more exciting or heroic than they started out. So anyway, come back for that, and thanks for listening.
Eggs will hatch into chicks and grow up into hens. Those hens will start laying more eggs again. Eggs for your soufflés and mayonnaise. Well, don't you think it's time they got hear it for eggs. Hooray for eggs. 3 cheers for eggs.
Rumi, I gotta tell you, living with you, it's like I'm walking on eggshells all the time.
That's because you're stepping on my Fabergé collection.
So, does this mean we're making omelets for breakfast?